The garrison that would not fall the moon had no name that mattered anymore. The Vastra Compact had called it Object 4 Delta in their survey logs, a cold gray rock orbiting a gas giant nobody wanted, useful only because it sat astride a trade lane that three species fought over for a decade before losing interest. When the humans arrived, they called it Watchpoint. When the war ended, everyone else forgot it. The humans did not. This is the story of why. Cathas Drayon had been a war reporter for the Compact for 31 cycles, which was long enough to have watched the second reclamation grind through 4 species in a dozen worlds, and long enough to have grown a thick, practiced numbness to the sight of ruin. She had filmed the fall of Meridian Spire. She had walked the burned agricultural terraces of Colony 7 with a camera drone at her shoulder, narrating the collapse of an entire harvest cycle in a voice she'd trained to stay level. She thought she had seen the shape of every kind of loss the war could produce. She had not yet been to Watchpoint. The transport that carried her down through the gas giant's outer bands was old, requisitioned from a mining consortium and never properly refitted, and it groaned the whole way like it rescented the cargo. Katha sat in the jump seat with her recorder in her lap and watched the moon grow from a smudge to a sphere to a landscape, gray and cratered and threaded through with the long straight scars of old trench lines. Nothing moved down there. Nothing had moved down there according to the last survey in 11 years. "Sure, this is worth the fuel," said the pilot, a Vekkai named Orsu who had flown supply routes during the war and never quite stopped flying them, even now that there was nothing left to supply. "It's a dead rock with a dead garrison on it. Command cleared it off the books years ago." "Command cleared a lot of things off the books," Katha said. "That's why I'm going. Things that get cleared off books are usually the things worth writing about." Orsu grunted and didn't argue further because arguing with a war reporter who had outlasted 3 editors and a change of government was a losing proposition, and everyone in the fleet knew it. They put down on the old landing apron at the edge of what had once been Watchpoint Station, a human-forward garrison built into the moon's largest crater during the war's darkest years. When the compact fleet had pushed the front line to within 2 systems of Earth itself, and the humans had needed every rock, every outpost, every scrap of defensible terrain they could hold. Watchpoint had been 140 human soldiers, a handful of light defense platforms and a promise, made in the brutal shorthand of wartime orders, that the position would not fall while there was a single soldier left to hold it. The promise had outlived the war. That was the part nobody back on the compact homeworlds understood, and the part Kathes had come to see with her own eyes. She stepped out onto the apron in her environment suit, and found the air already tagged breathable by her wrist display, thin but processed, and that alone told her something was wrong with everything she'd been told about this place. Dead garrisons did not have breathable air. Dead garrisons did not have gravity plating still humming faintly beneath the permacrete, a vibration she could feel through her boots. Something was still running. She walked the perimeter first, out of old reporter's instinct, cataloging before she went looking for people. The defense platforms stood where they had always stood, squat gray domes half sunk into the crater rim, their weapon ports capped in dark, not destroyed. Capped. Someone had shut them down deliberately, carefully, the way you'd retire a soldier rather than the way you'd abandon a position. The barracks blocks were intact. The mess hall windows were intact. There was frost on the inside of the glass, delicate and undisturbed, and through it she could see rows of tables, chairs pushed in neat, place settings that had not been touched in what looked like years but had been set once with a precision that suggested habit rather than haste. She found the flag first before she found the man. It stood on a pole at the center of the compound, planted in a base of poured permacrete that someone had mixed and cured by hand. The old Terran Federation banner faded nearly white by radiation and time, but still whole, still raised, its edges trimmed clean and even. Beneath it, a plaque hand-lettered, the kind of lettering that comes from someone with a steady hand and nothing but time. "This post has not fallen." She stood in front of it for a long moment, recorder forgotten in her hand, and that was when she heard the footsteps. He came around the corner of the command building at a measured pace, not hurried, not alarmed, a rifle slung but not raised, and for one disorienting second Kathas thought she was looking at a very good hologram, because nothing about him made sense against the backdrop of a moon that had been listed as unoccupied for 11 years. He was old, human old, she'd learn later, 70-some years by their reckoning, though something in the way he moved suggested a body that had been asked to do far more than 70 years should require. His uniform was patched in a dozen places, cleaned and pressed despite the patches, insignia polished. His face was lined the way stone gets lined by wind, not by neglect. "On compact registry," he said in compact standard, accented but clear. "First one in a while." State your business or state your intentions to leave. Kathess found her voice with the same discipline that had carried her through 31 cycles of worse moments than this one. I'm a journalist. Kathess Drayon, formerly of the War Correspondent Corps. I'm not armed. I'm not here on behalf of any military. Journalists lie for a living, the man said without heat, the way you'd state a fact about weather. But you came alone in a rented hauler and you're not reaching for anything, so I'll take the risk. Name's Colonel Samuel Reyes. Welcome to Watchpoint. He looked past her at the transport on the apron at Orsu's silhouette in the cockpit window. Your pilot can come down if he wants. We don't get much company. The war's been over for 6 years, Colonel, Kathess said, because it seemed like the thing that needed saying first, the thing that would either break something or explain everything. The compact signed the armistice at Telvashire. Your government ratified it 4 months later. It's over. Something moved behind Reyes's eyes, brief and old, gone almost before she could catalog it. I know, he said. I've known for 6 years. We monitor the relay traffic. It's degraded, but it comes through. Then why? She gestured, helpless for a moment in a way she hadn't been helpless in front of a story in a very long time, at the flag. The plaque, the polished insignia, the whole improbable, stubborn fact of him. Why is this post still standing? Why are you still in uniform? Reyes was quiet for a moment, and in that silence Kathess heard faintly the hum of the gravity plating, the tick of cooling metal somewhere in the compound, the particular deep silence of a place built for 140 people and holding now apparently one. Come inside, he said. It's a longer answer than fits out here, and I've got coffee, which I'd wager you haven't had a decent cup of in years, given who you work for. The command building's interior was warmer than Kathess expected, lit by half the fixtures that should have been running, the other half dark to save power that, she'd learned, was no longer scarce but had been rationed out of 11 years of habit that no longer knew how to stop. Reyes made coffee on a machine that looked older than the war itself, moving through the small ritual with the unhurried care of a man who had done it 10,000 times and found something worth keeping in the repetition. Watchpoint held the line for 41 months during the reclamation, he said, setting a cup in front of her that steamed with something that smelled astonishingly like real coffee and not the reconstituted approximation the fleet ran on. You know the history. Everyone knows the history. It's in the citations. What's not in the citations is the order we got in the last month before the front pulled back. He sat across from her, and for the first time she saw, close up, the particular exhaustion in him, not the exhaustion of a man who was tired, but the exhaustion of a man who had made peace with being tired a long time ago and simply continued anyway. High Command was pulling every forward garrison back to consolidate the defense line at the Saul approaches, he said. Standard withdrawal, textbook, nothing wrong with it. Watchpoint's orders came through with everyone else's. Except the transmission got interrupted, compact jamming mid-cycle. You know the specifics better than me, and what we received, what got logged and confirmed and countersigned by every officer on this post, was a fragment. Hold position. No relief anticipated. Post will not fall. That's a partial order, Kathess said slowly, the reporter in her already assembling the shape of the tragedy even as the human in her recoiled from finishing the sentence. That reads like an order fragment from a full withdrawal package. The hold position would have been contingent on conditions that never got transmitted to us, yes. Reyes turned his cup a quarter turn on the table, an old habitual gesture. We found that out 4 years later, going through captured compact signal logs after a salvage crew traded us a data core for fuel. By then it didn't much matter, we'd already held. Kathess set down her recorder, which she had, at some point without noticing, turned off. 140 of you, she said. Where are they now? Reyes finished for her, and something in his voice went very quiet and very careful. The voice of a man walking a path he'd walked so many times he no longer needed to look at his feet but still felt every stone. I'll tell you, that's most of why you came, isn't it, under the journalism? She didn't answer because he wasn't wrong, and she'd learned a long time ago not to insult a source by pretending otherwise. 41 months of siege, then the order, and then 6 more years of nothing, Reyes said. No relief because High Command believed we'd pulled back with everyone else. There was never a discrepancy report because the transmission fragment we received matched their withdrawal package close enough that nobody flagged it missing. We were a rounding error in a general retreat. 140 soldiers who didn't come home filed quietly under losses unaccounted because searching for us would have cost more than the war had left to spend. You didn't know that, not at the time. At the time we knew we had orders and we had a post and we had a compact fleet element still probing the system every few months looking for exactly the kind of soft target an abandoned garrison makes, so we held it. Simple as that in the moment. It only got complicated later when the relief never came and the war news started getting stranger and stranger through what signal we could still pull, and eventually we understood, all of us at more or less the same time, that we'd been left here. Not betrayed. Left. There's a difference, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to see it, but there is one. Cathas found she had to ask the question directly because there was no gentle way around it, and Reyes did not seem like a man who wanted the gentle way. "How many of the 140 are left, Colonel?" Reyes looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face, not grief exactly, grief had clearly been and gone through this man many times over and left something calmer in its wake, settled into an expression she recognized from 31 cycles of interviewing the survivors of terrible things. It was the look of someone about to hand you a weight they had been carrying alone for a very long time, and trusting you, for reasons of their own, to carry it correctly. "One," he said. "Me has been for the last 2 years and 8 months." Silence that followed had a texture to it, thick with everything Cathas did not know how to say and everything Reyes apparently had already said to himself so many times that he no longer needed her to say anything at all. "They didn't die in battle," he added after a while when it became clear she wasn't going to fill the silence and he decided to fill it himself. "Not most of them. The siege years took 31 of us. That's the number on the wall out back. If you want it exact, I keep it exact. But after the siege broke and the compact fleet pulled off the system for good, we had 109 left and 6 years of nothing to survive except time. Time's a harder enemy than any fleet element I ever fought. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you the dignity of a battle to rally against. It just takes people, one illness, one accident, one bad reactor seal at a time, for 6 years, while you wait for orders that you've started to understand aren't coming, and you have to decide every single one of those days whether you're still the kind of soldier who holds a line or whether you become something else. A survivor, a refugee. A man on a rock waiting to be forgotten properly instead of accidentally. You decided," Cathas said, "to keep being the first kind." "I didn't decide it alone. That's important, write that down if you're writing this. 109 people decided it together in the 3rd year, when the food math and the fuel math and the honest math of our situation all pointed the same direction. Toward finding a way off this rock and calling it survival instead of desertion. We had a vote. Not formal, we're a garrison, not a parliament, but a real one, every voice heard in the mess hall over 3 nights because it was the kind of decision that deserved 3 nights instead of 1. And the vote came back near unanimous. For as long as the post could be held with honor and without needless death, it would be held, not out of stubbornness. Out of the belief that somewhere someone was still keeping a promise on the other end of that order, even if we couldn't see it, and that the promise only meant something if both ends held. "That's not a strategic decision," Cathas said quietly. "That's a moral one." "Most of the good ones are," Reyes said. "You want to know the part that'll actually make your story, though? It's not the vote, it's what happened after." He got up, refilled both their cups without asking, and when he sat back down there was something almost lighter in him, the particular lightness of a man about to talk about the people he'd loved instead of the fact of losing them. 809 people held a dying post for 6 years, and I want you to understand what that actually looked like because it wasn't grim. That's the thing nobody who hasn't lived it ever gets right. We kept drills. We kept watches. We ran the defense platforms on rotating maintenance because a soldier who's maintaining equipment is a soldier who still believes the equipment matters. We had a garden, hydroponics, nothing fancy but real green things growing under lights we salvaged and rewired ourselves, and Sergeant Amara Okonkwo ran that garden like it was the most important post on the whole moon, because in a way it was. We had a school, if you can believe that. 3 of the soldiers had kids back home they'd never see again, and grief does strange things to people. And one of the strange things it did to Corporal Lena Vashti was make her start teaching mathematics to anyone who'd sit still for it, like the discipline of an equation was a kind of prayer. We had music nights. We had a still, which I am officially required to tell you is against regulations, and unofficially required to tell you saved more lives than the medical bay did some winters. We held funerals with full honors every single time, 31 during the siege and 69 more after. Every name read aloud, every flag folded properly, because a garrison that stops honoring its dead has already surrendered something the enemy never could have taken. Cathas found to her own surprise that her hands had gone still on the table, the reporter's instinct to interrupt and clarify and probe quieted by something that felt closer to reverence. "The last 3, Reyes said, and his voice for the first time did something that might have been called breaking if a voice that controlled could be said to break. were Okonkwo Vashti and a young private named Tomas Reyes. No relation before you ask, it's a common enough name back home, though I confess I let myself feel like it was toward the end, because a man alone starts looking for family in strange places. We lost Okonkwo to a reactor fault 8 years in, instantaneous, painless if that word means anything out here. Vashti held on the longest of the three past 90, which is a thing worth knowing that even after everything some of us found a way to grow old on this rock. Tomas was the last to go besides me, 26 years old. He should have had a whole life still ahead of him. Back on a green world he barely remembered, and instead he spent it here, and I want it on the record in whatever you write that he never once complained about that. Not once. He said the post needed holding and he was proud to be one of the ones holding it right up until the end, and if that's not the kind of thing your compact readers think humans are capable of, then your compact readers have never met one. Cathas had interviewed generals and refugees, war criminals and heroes, and had trained herself across 31 cycles not to let her voice catch on air during an interview. It caught now and she did not try to stop it, and you kept the post after that. Alone. Someone had to, Reyes said simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the galaxy, which to him it plainly was. The vote was near unanimous, and near unanimous still means the promise holds until every last one of us who made it says otherwise, and I never said otherwise. Neither did any of them at the end when I asked, because I always asked at the end. Every single one of the 109 died knowing the flag would still be up the next morning. That mattered to them. It matters to me. So I run the watches alone now, and I maintain what I can alone, and every morning I raise that flag myself, because the day I stop is the day this becomes what everyone assumes it already is, an abandoned rock instead of a garrison that held. Colonel, Cathas said, and found she had to stop and start again because there was a question underneath all the others that she needed to ask and was afraid of the answer to. The war is over. Your government knows the armistice is signed. If you called for extraction, if you told them where you were, they would come for you. You know that. I do know that, Reyes said. Sent the message myself 4 years ago once I understood what actually happened with that order fragment. Got a response eventually. Takes a while out here and longer still when a government has to work out how 140 of its soldiers went unaccounted for a whole war. Extraction ships coming. Has been coming for a while now. Bureaucracy, you understand, even in victory, especially in victory, everyone's busy rebuilding something. Should be here inside the year, they tell.